It's time for the traditional UK classic car season opener, the Practical Classics Restoration Show at the NEC. And as usual, I ferreted out the weirdest cars with the quirkiest stories that you might have missed elsewhere. We've got a car made partly out of chair legs that fired up for the first time in 63 years, a 1950s car that drove here via India, two different Morris Minors with some bizarre bodywork from the factory, an early Metro with a dent caused by a sex shop, a pond-find Morgan that goes way beyond Colin Chapman in adding lightness, an engine with two completely different ignition systems, and a Rover that had its head cut off by a brain surgeon. And there's plenty of other interesting cars as well, so let's get into it. The Restoration Show is always a great mix of gleaming finished projects and hedge finds as rough as a Wolverine stag night. Lots of stands featured cars from both ends of that spectrum and all points in between, like these Marcoses, for example, and these gorgeous Alfa Romeo Alfettas. Preserve versus restore is a perennial food fight in classic car circles, and any food fight in a circle is bound to get messy. But if messy is your thing, then check out this Montego. The show is famed for its barn finds, but this didn't even have a barn for shelter and spent 20 years in a field before being spotted as a potential donor car for a countryman estate. It's too good for that though. It's an ex-army car, hence the distinctive number plate, and it's a turbo diesel. So they hooked up a battery and I think some fresh fuel, and then the indestructible 2-litre Perkins Premier engine fired right up, and the car drove out of the field under its own power. It turned out to have very little in the way of brakes though, which added a bit more character to the front bumper here. But the brakes got sorted here at the show by its young owner Harry and his sister, whose name I didn't catch and who is just known on the info sheet as Harry's sister, which seems a little bit unfair. I'm sure she does have a name. They were very nice, and I wish them every success in putting the go back into this Montego. Another Austin that had been tucked away in rather better circumstances was this rare Mini Metro 1.3S. It's a very early car on a W registration, and in fact it was built in October 1980, which was the month that the Mini Metro was launched. It was owned from new by a lady called Angie as her first car, and it later passed to her brother Terry, who kept it in a dry garage on light duties. Sadly, Terry died last year, and Angie saw that the car went to a good home with the enthusiasts at the MG Rover Hub. It's a really nice spec. The S model only ran for a couple of years, and it was kind of redundant once the MG Metro came along. This one has various factory options like the 3-prong headrests, a passenger door mirror, and the unusual black paint. It's the only known surviving black S model. It's in great original condition apart from one dent in the rear quarter, which happened when a lorry driver got distracted by the window display of a sex shop in West Kensington and failed to stop at a junction. The Metro was sharing a stand with the Z25 group, who I had a chat with while trying not to distract them too much from replacing all the brakes on this lovely monogram ZS 180. One of them, Sam, has 5 MG-Z cars and has already done a full nut and bolt restoration on a ratty 2005 ZR, even though he's only 14 years old. So his life's already been ruined by the old car bug. The Metro's sex shop dent problem could have been avoided if only more vans had adopted the solution. Only vans? Sex shop? There's a joke there somewhere. Let's let that pass. If only more vans had adopted the solution the post office used on this Morris quarter ton, which is to fit rubber front wings. A bit of digging shows that these rubber wings were standard issue on GPO Morris minor vans in the early 1950s for a couple of years, and on some other vans too previously. The headlamps are mounted on stalks, and there are some other unusual features like the opening windscreen with roof-mounted wipers and enlarged door mirrors. Some accountant at the GPO was clearly fed up of shelling out for minor dings. No pun intended. For once. There are 4 of these rubber-winged minors still known to exist, so this is a very rare chance to buy one because it's for sale at Canterbury Classics. But there was an even more unusual Morris minor, which is this. It looks at first glance like a fairly normal early 1950s Series 2, but it has one very odd feature. Its roof is an entirely separate panel that's made not of steel, but of aluminium. It appears to have started out as a convertible, but it doesn't have the wooden frame or screw holes that are in the steel that are completed convertible would, and instead it has a complex 5-part aluminium roof brazed on instead. The emerging theory is that this must have been done at the factory on a part-completed convertible shell, but goodness only knows why. There's a bit of dissimilar metal reaction around the join here between the steel and the aluminium, but it's not bad considering. The owner found the car in a scrapyard in the 1990s. It's an extremely early Series 2 built in February 1951, and it still has some Series MM low-light parts like the bumper and the dashboard. It's now going to get a light restoration by the nice people who I chatted to at Luke Martin Coachworks, preserving as much of the original as possible so as not to lose all that weird history, such as we know about the history. But the hardtop Miner wasn't the only car whose roof material took me by surprise at the show. There was also this Riley RM 1.5, which was lacking the usual vinyl roof and had this perforated sheet steel affair. It's made up of multiple curved panels, stitch welded together. Apparently, they're all like this. It's a legacy of post-war steel shortages and high costs, although presumably it also does have the benefit of saving weight and lowering the centre of mass, which would bring better performance and handling. Normally, the metal is covered with a layer of Hessian and then the Everflex vinyl. But if any water gets in, it goes straight through and rots the structural ash frame underneath. I think these Riley RMs are really elegant cars, and I imagine the 2.5 litre version can cope pretty well with modern roads. But the prize for a Riley coping with roads has to go to this Pathfinder, the RM's bigger brother. The unusual number plate is from Western Australia, and the car drove here overland for 10,000 miles. This isn't for this show, it was for the Riley Centenary celebrations in 1996. The owners shipped it from Fremantle to India and then drove via Pakistan, Iran and Turkey, and then across Europe and across the Channel to Dover, successfully negotiating all sorts of hazards along the way until they parked up outside William Riley's old house in Coventry for the celebrations, where somebody promptly nicked all their camera gear. They did eventually get it back though, so there are pictures to tell the story. Another famous Coventry car maker, like Riley, that ended up getting consumed by British Leyland was Alvis, makers of this lovely 1947 TA saloon with Mulliner body, and also this TA station wagon from the same year with a wooden body made by Jensen. Yes, that Jensen. More on them in a moment. Just a handful of these coach-built shooting brakes survive, 6 I believe, and this one does run and is now partway through a restoration after being found in, yes, a barn. Jensen started out as a coach builder, but this is more the sort of thing you'd picture from them. This lovely Interceptor convertible here, one of 267 made, or this Jensen Healey with its 16-valve Lotus 907 engine, rather than the Interceptor's Chrysler Big Block V8. Over at the back here is Frank from Pegasus Classics, with his Jensen Healey that has a rare factory hardtop and conversion to a 3.5 litre Rover V8 engine with an LT77 manual gearbox. Frank is a great professional mechanic up in Cheshire. I'll put a link below to his channel, and he's always to be found working on this car at this show. This year he was swapping the heads, which means he's nearly done everything now, apart from a touch of welding and a repaint. So while we were chatting, he very kindly came up with the suggestion of offering to help me work on one of my cars at next year's show, which would be fantastic. Let's see what happens there. We'll have to figure out what stand and what car and what jobs to do, but it's a great offer. People working on their cars is one of the best features of the restoration show, and it seemed like there was more of it than ever this year, which was fantastic to see. The Corsair Club were hard at it as always, and someone's got a busy Sunday ahead of them putting this Citroen Ami 6 back together. Hope they got back okay and aren't still stuck in the NEC in the middle of some other exhibition. Another of my favourites was this 1967 Vanden Plas 1100 Series 1, which they were making all sorts of progress on. When I stopped by, they were cutting up some steel tube with an angle grinder to scratch build an exhaust for it, and you can see how much they've been ticking off the list that's written on the bonnet in felt pen. Good work. The 1100 replacement was of course this, the Austin Allegro, and there were quite a few early examples of Allegros at the show in various states, from thoroughly polished to thoroughly demolished. This Allegro 1750 SS is somewhere in between. It's the oldest one here, dating back to October 1973, and it was found in a barn and featured on Johnny Smith's YouTube channel a couple of years ago. This one belongs to Alex of Alex's Assets on YouTube, who is also a professional classic car mechanic based in Gloucestershire. I'll put a link to her channel as well. This one is an early press car from January 1974. It then got sent to BL's own special tuning division for conversion to a rally car and had its first outing in 1975 with none other than Russell Brooks. Later, of course, a two-time British rally champion. It carried on rallying through the 1970s and 80s. Somewhere along the line, something bad clearly happened. But it's now owned by Andy Ace Harrison, who owned it in the late 1980s and is planning to restore it to its then Western Mail rally livery, using as much of the original shell as he can salvage. That's going to be a job and a half. Another rally car that's fared slightly better is this 1985 Skoda 130, and that has a Russell Brooks connection too, because it was prepared for and finished the 1988 Lombard RAC Rally by Alan Christopher, who at one point had been Russell Brooks's navigator. There was a Racing Mark II Vauxhall Astra as well, but the one that caught my eye was this cooking model Astra L next to it, which looked absolutely showroom fresh. Anyone who drove on a British motorway in the 1980s, though, knows that the fastest Vauxhall Astra of all was actually the Bedford Astra van. And there was a rare surviving example of these here in Footman James Barnfind Corner. This one appears to have lived a rather eventful life, although it only had one owner before it was unearthed by current owner Rory Clegg, who will be restoring it on his Saloon Build channel on YouTube and the usual socials. I do hope he keeps some of its originality and character. One of the problems I have at the show is that I do most of the filming on my phone, or possibly on a handheld camera, and I've run out of battery before the end of the show, well before. It's about lunchtime now, and I'm already down to 38% on my phone. And it's just not going to last very much longer with all the filming I'm doing. So this is incredibly helpful. It's a power bank. It's made by Asper X, and the nice people at Asper X sent me this to try out and try and see if it solves my problem. And it does it really well, because I can just plug the phone into it and I can walk around carrying this. It's got a handle attached, it doesn't weigh very much, just under 2 kilos, and I can charge my phone up and it works really quickly. So instead of having to sit somewhere for an hour, if I can find a socket, well under an hour this will be fully charged, and I can be filming and messaging and talking as I go. This is going to be my go-to for every show now on, and I'll get a lot of use out of it. It'll work for camping and whatever as well. Not that I do a lot of that, but I do a lot of this. The team at Asperex didn't tell me what to say or want to write a veto over the video or anything like that at all. They just gave it to me to review. Full disclosure, they did let me keep it, but I'm really glad that they did, because it's been a really good experience. I'm more impressed with it than I thought I would be. The box charges really quickly, it charges devices really quickly. I'm even using it to power my studio light here at the moment, because it cuts down on trailing wires around the place, and I'll use it for that in the workshop as well. It's going to be really useful. Anyway, check out the link in the description if you think that's something that might be useful to you too. Still with Vauxhalls, the FD and FE Victor crew had a bomb site car lot thing going on, which I rather liked, with this runs good and runs gooder. And this top-of-the-range Carlton CD elsewhere was delicious as well. Now we're about halfway through, I should probably mention that I don't cover every car at the show, or even every car that I like necessarily. I tend to focus more on the weird and the interesting backstories. If I miss something, then please accept my apologies. I do always recommend checking out Joseph at Lloyd Vehicle Consulting, who does a very fine job of covering absolutely everything. I'll put a link to his channel down in the description as well. This Opel Monza has been at the last few restoration shows, getting gradually restored from a very rusty state, and is now well on its way. They're doing a lovely job on it too. It's a really nice finish. Maybe at the next show I won't recognise it because it'll all be done and looking pristine. Over in Barnfine Corner there was another interesting Vauxhall, this pre-facelift Mark III Cavalier in rare GSI 2000 spec with the 16-valve red top engine, and some weirdly rusty rear arches. Do these always go like that? Let's have a quick whiz around the rest of Barnfine Corner while we're here. There's a Morris 10 and a Triumph Dolomite Sprint. Porsche 924 with these so 80s 3-spoke wheels. A Nissan Datsun Cherry N12, I think that is, with such a red interior. An MGB 71, Gary Mavers Bentley T Series, which is really coming on. That was badly crash damaged and he's making really good progress with it. The Citroen 2CV, looking a bit scabby from storage, but very savable and pretty good inside for a 2CV. And this Fiesta XR2 with very rusty rear arches, but not really much worse than my Honda Aerodeck, so that should live again. 88-ish Maestro City, a Ford Zephyr Zodiac, and a Land Rover Series 3 that had a bit of a prang. Triumph Stag, and this really nice early console Cortina. It just looks like it needs an oil change and a wash. Amazingly, there were 3 of these Mazda 1300s. A 4-door saloon and an estate with the Barnfines here, and a yellow estate on the Lancaster Concours stand that shows what they looked like when they were brand new, or maybe slightly better than brand new in this case. The most striking car in Barnfine Corner though was this. I bet you can't guess what it is. I sent a picture to some knowledgeable car friends and they took ages to identify it. It's a 1990 Lee Francis Ace of Spades, and it's not so much unrestored as unfinished, because it wasn't found in a barn at all, but in the factory where it was still partway through being built when the 1980s Lee Francis revival got shut down. Lee Francis was, of course, another Coventry car maker alongside Alvis and Riley, not to mention Triumph and Jaguar and a whole host of others. So on top of the Jaguar XJ running gear on this car is a body that's lovingly handcrafted out of aluminium. With its Peugeot 205 taillights, it only looks like a cheap fiberglass kit car. If you want a genuine fiberglass kit car, then look no further than the Mini Kits stand, which on one level contains no surprises at all, because they're all, well, they're kits based on Minis, but the stand always has something bonkers to enjoy. All the cars were great, but the show stealer was this, which is a Tichy. It's 3 feet shorter than a standard Mini, and it looks like all of that's come out of the wheelbase. So its length is only a couple of inches more than the width of a modern Mini Countryman. I'll leave that sitting there for a moment for you to think about. The Mini engine goes in behind the seats and the hardtop's detachable, and it weighs less than a Mini, so you've got a proper mid-engined sports car going on. And I bet it's a right hoot to drive. I don't know if the contrast was deliberate, but just around the corner from the Tichy was this absolute monster of a Kenworth W900 conventional from 1978. Apart from its size, the astonishing thing about this is that you can still buy one of them new. And the new ones look basically identical to this. They just have slightly squarer lights that came in 1982. A rather older American truck is this American La France fire engine. It's a Type 75 and it's exactly 100 years old this year. It has a 14.5 litre side valve engine that gets 115 brake horsepower from 6 cylinders arranged in pairs. And bizarrely, it operates 2 completely different ignition systems. Each cylinder's got 2 spark plugs, one fired by a traditional magneto and the other using a more modern coil points and distributor arrangement. The idea is that it can run on either or both, so there's redundancy built in if one fails. And then I saw that the engine drives the rear wheels via a prop shaft and chains, at which point my head exploded and I had to move on. The Volvo posse had a truck as well, and a number of other nice Volvos, including this 940 Estate that someone has converted into a homemade camper van. It's very neatly done, if a slightly eccentric choice. They had this Saab 92 as well, and this immaculate DAF 44. I didn't notice anyone actually working on the DAF, but it did have a set of drive belts from its funky continuously variable transmission on the front seat. Speaking of belts, that was a job that was being done on this Lancia Tamer. Even I got mixed up with the whole working on car things, because at one point on Friday you'd have found me crouching down under this car, it's a 16 valve, doing the grunt work of catching coolant in a bucket, while my more competent Lancia friends changed the water pump and ultimately the timing belts as well. My friend Lee has a car identical to this, which he's offered me a go of, so hopefully that'll be coming to the channel soon. In fact, there's another rare executive saloon coming up that I'm also planning to drive and film, but more on that shortly. There were 2 Lancia Tamers on the stand. The other one was this magnificent 832, complete with its pop-up spoiler and 8-cylinder 32-valve 3-litre Ferrari engine, which I think it's a 2.9 strictly speaking. Anyway, it's derived from the 308 GTB with some minor modifications for a big saloon car. Very nice. I spent quite a lot of the weekend hanging out with the Lancia guys, who were gently nudging me to get on with fixing and recommissioning my own Lancia, which is a Gamma Coupe, and I really should do that, but it has to compete for attention with a few other cars though, like the Matra Rancho I'm slowly restoring. I've got a Lotus Elite as well, but it's not as nice as this very smart and very 1970s brown one on the Lotus Grand Tourers stand. Colin Chapman era Lotuses like this one are of course famed for their ingenious lightness, but there's another car I found that takes that to a whole new level, or rather an old level, because it's this brilliant Morgan Grand Prix from 1919. Everywhere you look there's weight saving. I mean, there's only one rear wheel for a start, because 3 wheels is a perfectly stable arrangement as long as the single one is at the back, and indeed you can still buy a Morgan 3-wheeler today, and they're huge fun. It's got no front brakes, but it's got 2 back brakes, because that stops the thing perfectly well, and it stops the nose diving, and it leaves the front wheels to concentrate on steering. There's not even a separate exhaust pipe, it just sends the exhaust out through the chassis tubes. The bonnet doubles as the fuel tank, which is also the oil tank, with 2 fillers side by side and a plate welded in to keep the petrol separate from the oil, which is fine until that rusts, at which point you've got a problem. I love this car. It was found in a pond and has been beautifully and carefully restored over time ever since. But there's another Morgan 3-wheeler that's even more extraordinary, and it deservedly won the prize for the best unrestored car in the show. And it's this 3-wheeler from 1936, which its owner modified early in its life using some chair legs to widen the ash frame at the back so there's room to wedge in a pair of children. It's been owned by its current owner, Richard, since he got it as a non-runner when he was just 16. He's now 80, and Tom and a colleague who you can see here have managed to get it to fire up so that Richard can see it run and then ultimately drive it for the first time since 1963. I'm getting quite emotional here just thinking about that. That is what the Restoration Show is all about. What wooden frame cars like the Morgans and the Alvis lack in rust, they make up for in wet rot and woodworm, which is what was being tackled here on this glorious 1949 Jowett Bradford coach-built ice cream van. The Jowett stand only had Bradford vans this year because it's the model's 80th birthday, and it was a very fine selection of relatively normal ones and interesting coach-built ones. You see the occasional press car at shows, but I think this is the first time I've seen a car from a television advert. This Ford Probe is one of 3 cars that Ogilvy and Mather flew to the moon in the launch campaign for the Probe in 1994. Meanwhile, this appears to be a man lubricating his probe with WD-40, but I am really not going to go there, so let's move on. That TV advert was in 1994, which is also the displacement in cubic centimetres of the T-Series and L-Series engines used in Rover 600s. Although this one is a 1999, so it has the Honda 1997 that came in 1998, rather than the 1994 from 1993 to 1997. Glad we've cleared that up. Lovely car, as are all of these Rover 800s on the same 600 and 800 club stand. My favourite, I think, was this facelift Sterling V6 in woodcut green, which is an absolutely gorgeous colour that I don't remember ever seeing before. I'm not sure what it is about Rovers, but people seem especially inspired to take a gas axe to them and remove substantial proportions of the bodywork. There were several such amputees at the show, including this very nicely executed P6 3500 convertible, modified at home in the late 90s by a man whose day job was as a brain surgeon. 4-door saloons made into 2-door convertibles sometimes look oddly proportioned because of the relatively small doors, but I think this one gets away with it just about. Access to the rear can also be difficult, but our smart friend deployed the seats from a Volvo 343 that have this diagonal tilting arrangement which makes it easier to climb in. The other chopped up Rovers are also homemade, and they're both pickup conversions, probably also done sometime in the 1990s. There's this P4 which has been rather neatly done. I say it's homemade, this one might be a professional job. It's got this separate wooden back part that looks really good. Having a separate chassis, there's no structural reason why a Rover P4 shouldn't make a rather good pickup. There are a few around, and someone in the UK operates a P4-based recovery truck for vintage motorbikes, I think. There was another homebrew Rover pickup too, this SD1, looking like it ought to have love and hate tattooed on its knuckles. The tailgate and everything are actually quite neatly done, and despite the 3500 badge, I think it has the 2.4 litre diesel engine swapped in as well, just to complete the picture. The current owner, having rescued it, is planning to tidy it up. But I have to say, I rather like it in its current full sink estate glory. There were some more elegant but still very muscular Rovers here on the SD1 club stand as well though, including no fewer than 3 red Vitesses, one of which was the fabled twin plenum variety. I'm not sure I've ever actually seen the twin plenum side by side with its single plenum sister before, so there you go, that was a privilege. Probably rarer still nowadays though was this, a Series 1 V8S. I'm not going to spend too long drooling over this here, not because it isn't drool-worthy, it is, but because I'm planning to spend some quality time with this car next week and make a whole separate video on it. I'll post a link to that up here when it's ready, but meanwhile, you know what buttons you need to click if you don't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, see you next time.